Alright, Nick, thanks for that video. First, let's clear up something. Words are the units of the mind, even though in the comment section of my video response to my paper, it was Normonics Joe who sort of showed me that it's not that words are actual units. They're not separate from each other because the meaning of a word comes from its context, how it's used in a certain situation. So every time I hand you this word and I say dog, to know the meaning of that word, not just, a furry thing with four legs, but the real deep meaning and all the associations between it, I have to know a lot of other words. So the one word and the many words around it in the language are all connected. And so if a word is a unit of thought in the mind, it contains many other words within it. So it's not a separate unit. It's not one piece. It's a piece with many other pieces reflected in it, sort of like a hologram or something like that. Now, when we talk about the brain, the basic units are neurons, the stadium seats. And yes, somehow stadium seats support the mind and the words that the mind uses, but it's not necessarily, one neuron switches on and that's a word. And I mean, it's a dynamic relationship between neurons that create the sound that comes out of my mouth and the picture that I see in my head, because words, when we write them, are somewhat like pictures. Learning to read is learning how to picture sounds on a page or in our visual cortex. We're learning to picture sounds. And so language is still a type of picturing. Like, I can talk right now and visualize the words going by in my mind, right? And I think that the type of language that we have, an alphabetized language, is different certainly than a character-based language like Chinese, Egyptian, Japanese. These languages are definitely picture-based. But it's not that much further away to move to an alphabetized language. It's still based on pictures. We learn most of our ability to think in a highly abstract and conceptual way from learning how to write and how to read. Before we can write and read, and we can only speak our language, we can't quite get as in-depth with our concepts. We can communicate with our parents and get what we want typically, but we can't go to the higher level of abstraction. So again, there's thinking, and there's two ways to look at thinking. You can look at it as something the mind does, and you can look at it as something the brain does. When the mind does it, the basic units are words, even though each one single word contains many other words for it to have a meaning. But when we talk about the brain, the basic units are neurons, even though I think the same thing applies. Each neuron, being that it is connected to every other neuron in the brain and nerve in the body, is also a unit that contains many other units. So there's always this dynamic relationship going on. And if we want to maybe bring those words consciousness and unconsciousness back into this picture without confusing the whole thing, the part of the mind that thinks in words is probably the conscious part, right? Because we hear ourselves thinking, and that's what we get. That's the stream of consciousness that we are aware of. So that's the conscious part. And then the cognitive unconscious, not the psychological unconscious with the shadow and the id and all that, but just the brain unconscious, all the neurons doing their thing without us being in control or aware of them. That's the unconscious. So the brain neurons doing their thing is the unconscious, and the mind and the words doing their thing somehow on top of all that neural activity is the consciousness. And before that higher level of abstraction called mind or language arises or emerges on those neurons, there is thinking, but it's all unconscious. There's no ego who is aware. There is no consciousness. So conscious thought is words. It can also be visualizations. You can manipulate shapes in your head. You can manipulate people's faces. And that is, I think it's still, I mean, why not just call it a different kind of thought? That's fine. So we've got thoughts that are based on the visual cortex's work, and we've got thoughts that are based on the language center's thoughts. And they both are combined in a sense because, like I said before, reading and writing is still somewhat visual. So there's connections, there's a relay going on, but conceptual intelligence, I think, for the most part, is supported by language. Before we could read and write, there's no philosophy. Philosophy is really a function of writing, because until you can write your thoughts down, you can't really build an edifice of a philosophical edifice. You mentioned that when we write, are we thinking and then translating it into writing, or just is the writing itself the thinking? And I sort of follow Andy Clark on this, that the writing itself is the thinking. As we write, we are thinking upon the page, just as when we think to ourselves, consciously at least, we need that stream of hearing ourselves speaking. But certainly there is a kind of, I guess we call it kinesthetic intelligence or bodily intelligence. So a caveman might know how to build an axe just based on muscle memory. He doesn't understand consciously in words what he's doing. He doesn't talk to himself to do it. He just knows how to do it like you know how to ride your bike. So maybe a good thought experiment here is to ask, do animals think? And I think the answer is yes. They don't have a written language. But do they have language? I think they do. There's no ultimate separation between human language and animal language, besides the fact that they can't write it down. And some of them can't necessarily speak it, but there's all kinds of gestural-based languages. Meerkats, they make sounds, they move around in certain ways to alert the troop of danger. And dolphins, they can't write a language, but they seem to have names for each other and have a very complicated set of syntactical speech acts that they can really communicate with each other in depth. And there's been a lot of research on this, and it's hard, of course, to really find out what they're saying to each other, but based on the behavior of the dolphins and the variety of sounds that they produce, a lot of scientists, John Lilly is a good person to look up. I'll try to find some links and post his research. He thought that dolphins were probably more intelligent than we are, and more linguistically advanced, and that they had this multi-dimensional language, whereas ours only works within the 3 dimensions of space that we're used to. Well, dolphin language apparently is 5, 6, 7 dimensions or whatever. And that they can actually transfer pictures to each other's brains directly, and we can do that too. But there's an amount of I have to fill in the blank. When I hear you use certain words like bicycle, I fill in the blank with the bicycle that I'd like to see. You can say red bicycle with big wheels. Okay, that helps. But somehow the dolphins with their squeaks can really transfer pictures through the water, not this extra layer of putting it into sound, and then I have to translate that back into a picture. They can actually do it directly. So something to think about at least. There's no ultimate separation between animals and humans besides the writing language part. Writing is what gave birth to history, that's the only thing that really separates human beings from animals, right? The fact that we think we're making progress somewhere because of our ability to write things down, to keep track of all that we do. We can grade our own progress. And it's all an illusion, I would say. History itself is sort of an illusion. Time is a measurement. Time is a function of language too. Without, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 o'clock, without the calendar, without the 30 days and the 365 in a year and all these things, what is time? It's a very subjective experience, we might say. And so history, to demarcate all the events of human history as if they're leading up to something great, I mean, it becomes hard to do that.